The Polynesian Triangle is like an ancient spearhead thrust across the great Pacific Ocean. Long ago, a voyaging people made this their home. The story of the Polynesians is an epic natural history. Man and nature, each shaping the destiny of the other. 2,000 years before Columbus ventured across the Atlantic, a tenacious voyaging people set out to conquer the Pacific, our greatest ocean. They had no knowledge of the rest of the world, nor we of them. They carried their unique nomadic culture across a galaxy of islands, an oceanic world that covers a third of our planet. The Pacific Ocean is the greatest wilderness on Earth, an endless inner space. To us who live on land, it is an unpredictable place of mystery and fear. To this primordial world came an invasion of an alien species that within a brief passage of time would become the most widespread form of life across the entire Pacific. Without benefit of metal tools or instruments of navigation, these nomads of the wind ventured across the vast Pacific in double-hulled canoes carved from the trunks of forest trees. In their own language, they called themselves the people. They knew no others. When discovered by the world outside, they became known as the Polynesians. All Polynesian voyagers believed that beyond every horizon awaited undiscovered lands, an earthly paradise where they could start a new life. A place endowed by nature and blessed by their gods. Scattered across the Pacific are more than 20,000 islands. Each one, like a jewel, rises from the sea, a beacon, signaling to life. The island world of Polynesia forms a vast triangle, with Hawaii in the north, New Zealand in the far southwest, and to the east, lonely Easter Island. In the center of the triangle, midway between the continents of Asia and South America, lie the islands of Tahiti, the heart of the Polynesian world. Tahiti rose as volcanoes from the bed of the ocean only 1,000,000 years ago. Shaped by wind and rain, the young mountains lie in the path of the easterly trade winds, laden with moisture from their journey across the ocean. As sweet fresh water cascades from the summits, it carries minerals, enriching the valleys, making everywhere green. Steep mountain slopes deflect the winds upwards. As they rise, they cool, saturating the morning air with mist and cloud. The summits of Tahiti rise to 7,000 feet. Here, the air is always cool and moist, perfect for mosses and ferns that festoon the branches of evergreen trees, stunted by the wind. Almost every afternoon brings rain, making this mountaintop one of the wettest places on Earth. This abundance of water encourages a luxuriance of tropical plants. But here in the middle of the world's greatest ocean, there is precious little variety of life. But the handful of plant species that have made the ocean crossing have flourished into unique and beautiful forms. For them, this new world has proved to be a natural paradise. This island skink is one of the few lizards to have arrived on Tahiti. Sipping nectar from burrata blossoms, it fulfills an ecological role more normally reserved for birds or insects. It is no coincidence that fruit doves find such succulent fruits on Tahiti. The plants arrived here as seeds in the stomachs of the birds' ancestors. Since then, the doves and the trees have existed in perfect partnership. Tahiti is a far cry from any continent. Cut off from the mainstream of life, it is a primordial Garden of Eden. Cascading streams are the lifeblood of the island's forests. Below their surface, animal life is sustained by nutrients carried by the flow. Long ago, these goby fish left their ancestral home on the reef to colonize these freshwater streams. By raising the flag-like fins along his back, the electric blue male signals his readiness to mate. If willing, the female leads him in an upright dance of courtship. Their offspring will be carried downstream to mature in the warm nursery of the sea. The prawns which share this pool are scavengers, hunting for scraps on the bed of the stream. Like the gobies, these crustaceans are recent recruits to the freshwater of Tahiti. Their spawn will also be carried back towards the all-embracing sea. It is the constant cycle of fresh water that vitalizes this high oceanic island. From the summits of the mountains to the swathes of lowland forest, it feeds the land and nurtures life before coursing out across the reef to merge with the vastness of the ocean. Here, where land meets sea, the rainforest gives way to thickets of coconut palms, one of the few tropical plants able to root and grow in the dunes of coral sand that collect along the shore. For people and for wildlife, it is often the saving grace of tropical islands. For these Pacific lorikeets, the palms are a constant larder and a shady playground in the heat of the day. For the Polynesians, the coconut palm became an indispensable source of food and raw materials for day-to-day island life. To us, the image of the palm tree symbolizes paradise. No plant could be more appropriate. The lagoon, benign meeting place of land and sea. Enriched by nutrients swept down in the rivers, its warm, shallow waters nurture a dazzling wealth of life. Great shoals of zebrafish patrol among the coral heads. With many eyes alert to danger, there is safety in numbers. Flocking also increases the chance of finding food. The whole school reaps the rewards of an observant individual. Spinner dolphins come to Tahiti's lagoons to seek shelter from the dangers of the open ocean. They move in family groups, communicating constantly by sound and touch. Courtship is gentle and playful. Here in the shelter of the lagoon, they can reinforce their bonds and perpetuate their line. Dolphins were held in great regard by Polynesians. They led voyagers to new islands and protected fishermen from sharks. Of all creatures of the sea, it is the dolphin, with its free spirit way of life and commitment to family ties, that embodies the Polynesian voyaging spirit. The sun beats down on two worlds, sea and air, that meet at the surface of the lagoon. It is here that the great wealth of the tropics is most apparent. Frigate birds are nomadic masters of the ocean skies. Among seabirds, their flying skills are unmatched. They seldom wet their feathers in pursuit of fish. Instead, they specialize in aerial piracy, preferring to plunder someone else's booty, even from their own kind. Frigate birds are great ocean travelers, journeying hundreds of miles between islands. But when ready to mate, they return to their ancestral breeding grounds to build makeshift nests and compete for partners. The male birds signal their intentions by inflating a pouch of skin beneath the throat. The showy display is designed to attract passing females. For those in peak breeding condition, it seems irresistible. But the signal triggers different responses from competing suitors. In a crowded colony, the flamboyant flash of red is a recipe for masculine conflict. For the first Polynesian sailors, a soaring flock of frigate birds could mean only one thing. Their journey was nearly at its destination. After weeks at sea, excitement was tinged with anxiety that the newfound island might not be as blessed as the one they had left behind, or that it might already be inhabited. As leader of his people, it fell to the chief to guide them to safe landfall, under their tiki's watchful eye. Only when inside the safety of the reef could they take in the nature of the island they had voyaged so far to find. Here was a shallow lagoon, well sheltered from the swell of the ocean, just as they had hoped. And behind the shoreline stretched a vast forest, beyond which rose tall mountains, cloaked in green. For generations, their ancestors had dreamed of such a place. They would be proud of the achievement of their favored sons and daughters. Tangaroa, the god of seafarers, had been benevolent. If no other tribe had come this way, this island would become their new home, a place to cultivate a new life, a Hawaii-iki, a homeland they could call their own. This was indeed the fabled heaven that lay beyond the rising sun. Tangaroa had not failed them. From today, this ancient god would stand supreme. From today, they would have allegiance to a new whenua, a new land, which by skill and good fortune they would fashion into paradise. Tahitian people fear the dark. It is the time when spirits haunt the human world. Fire protects the living from the dead. If blessed, this small band of pioneers will grow in numbers. By dawn, the seeds of a new generation will be sown. The fertility of the soil of this new land would mirror their own fruitfulness. Their precious cargo of plants and domestic animals would now be the foundation of their new life. Pigs and dogs, brought as breeding stock, would provide flesh to supplement their domestic fowl. Essential crops had been brought as young plants, seeds or tubers, and would now play their part in shaping the fortunes of these hopeful island pioneers. Gardening was the key to their survival. In the fertile soils of this high volcanic island, seeds and cuttings needed only warmth and water to grow, and there is plenty of that on all such tropical islands. By carefully cultivating their traditional trees and crops, the immigrants effectively transported their familiar landscapes to their adopted home. Within a few seasons, they would reap the fruits of their careful planning and good management. Until the land had been tamed and transformed, they would rely on the natural resources of the island, particularly those of the sea. Where rivers and streams enter the shallow lagoon, reef fish congregate, feeding on rich pickings. Driven by the beaters and the tide, the fish are funneled into traps built of rocks and coral stone. The ingenious maze finally leads towards a blind alley, where, with Polynesian resourcefulness, a single fisherman can scoop enough for all. The lagoon was vital to the first Tahitians. Without it, their early settlements would have struggled to survive. Along the strand line, where floating seeds are washed ashore, familiar trees take root. Coconut palms, naturally established along the shoreline, made this the most popular part of the island, a place with the best of both worlds, the marriage of land and sea. The Barringtonia tree had long ago become a native of Tahiti. Known as hotu, its large nut was valued by all Polynesians as a powerful medicine. Made into a paste, its grated kernel was smeared on coral heads to stun reef fish. The delicate flowers of the Barringtonia bloom in the morning light. By midday, they have wilted and fallen to the ground. The yellow-flowered hibiscus was already a native of Tahiti, but the famous red-bloomed plants were brought by the first settlers from their homeland. In Tahitian folklore, every plant has its place. The spotted fruits of the nono made powerful medicines, and from its roots came a yellow dye. Other plants made shampoo for the hair and ointments for the skin. Mixed with seawater and coconut milk and heated to a paste, the grated Barringtonia nuts were often applied as a poultice to relieve aching muscles. Every Tahitian woman had her favorite remedies. For the first Tahitians, the bountiful nature of their island was a constant source of reassurance. To have discovered an uninhabited island with such conspicuous natural fertility was the Polynesian dream. Here, on this favoured isle, they created a place for themselves and their children. Essential to the success of the founding community was the wisdom and knowledge that came with age and experience. From an older generation, The new generation acquired the capacity to be resourceful with the nature of their island home. Ring-shaped coral reefs to the northeast of Tahiti mark the outlines of ancient volcanic islands which have sunk beneath the sea. With no mountains to catch rain, there is little fresh water nor life on land. But within the protective barrier of the reef, the salt water of the lagoon is a welcome oasis in the vastness of the open ocean. These are some of the most remote coral reefs in the Pacific Ocean. They lie thousands of miles from its continental margins, from where the oceanic wildlife must have come. Only a handful of species have made the long journey to this faraway heaven, where, unrestrained by competition, they abound and multiply. For the Polynesians who settled on low coral atolls, survival required a particular tenacity. With no forests, they were very dependent on the resources of the lagoon, with its bounty of edible seaweeds and shellfish. The men were the fishermen, and the women gleaners of the reef. Throughout Polynesia, it is a pattern of life which helped sustain people on even the most remote oceanic island. The roar of the distant surf is a constant reminder of the power of the ocean. It had carried their ancestors to this faraway heaven. Now it was their constant provider. Beyond the pounding reef, the open ocean linked the Polynesian world. Carried by the wind and waves, other voyagers had discovered other lands in this vast ocean. Northeast of Tahiti, 1,000 miles towards the equator, lie the remote and rugged Marquesas Islands. Here, the high islands have no reef to protect them. Exposed to the full force of the Pacific, the coast has been carved into fjord-like inlets and the land into magnificent towering peaks. The volcanoes that formed these islands are much older than those of Tahiti. millions of years of erosion by tropical rains have laid bare their jagged basalt cores and sculpted the harsh landscape into a fantastic labyrinth of pinnacles and gorges. This landscape of savage beauty is the realm of one of the world's most graceful creatures, the tropic bird. High above the valley floor, they speed from the sea, their long tail plumes streaming behind them, to the head of the valleys, where they rear their young. For the people of these remote and dramatic islands, these elusive white birds, part seabird, part creature of the land, echoed their own way of life. From the high plateau, rivers cascade into the canyons. This waterfall on the island of Nukuhiva plunges 1,200 feet, 8 times deeper than Niagara. The Marquesas Islands were discovered by Polynesian people more than 2,000 years ago. As on Tahiti, the first settlers arrived with their essential crops. They soon discovered that one tree flourished more than any other, the breadfruit. Baked or steamed, it became their staple diet. The breadfruit tree reaches maturity in 5 or 6 years, and full grown, produces as many as 150 fruits a year. The task of picking the heavy fruits was entrusted to agile young men, who skillfully netted them on long poles and with a twist retrieved them to the waiting basket. It was a communal task, for the benefit of the entire family group to whom this tree belonged. Whenever a child was born, a new tree was planted. It would produce fruits for 50 years, enough sustenance for a lifetime. No wonder the first European explorers to the Pacific were filled with admiration and envy at the sight of such a bountiful tree. In centuries to come, collecting cuttings of this miracle plant would become the commercial objective of the Bounty on her ill-fated voyage to the South Seas. For the people of the Marquesas, the breadfruit, brought to the islands by their foresighted ancestors, was their most treasured inheritance. Peeling breadfruit with a sharpened cowrie shell was an acquired skill. The lasting appeal of this copious fruit is that it can be prepared and stored to counter the effects of famines. A prudent family prepared for lean years ahead. Bitter experience had taught the people of the Marquesas to lay down stocks in times of plenty. For years in a row, rains can fail. In others, it pours incessantly for months. A diet of breadfruit may not be the most appetizing, particularly by the time it has fermented into a sticky mass which smells like rotting cheese, but which is highly nutritious. Sliced with a bamboo blade, the starchy pith is stacked in a tall vessel constructed of wood and lined with tressed coconut leaves, to be trampled to a pulp. This barefoot task was considered an honor and was traditionally performed by a circumcised young man who should not only have the tattoo marks of manhood, but who should have abstained from making love during the period of the breadfruit harvest. Around his loins, he wore a ceremonial wrap of bark cloth, dyed with the yellow pigment of the nono tree. The final product, the ma, was stored underground in pits lined with stones and specially plaited leaves of the cordyline tree, a sugary plant which had magical properties to help preserve and protect their precious communal larder. Here, beneath the forest floor, the breadfruit harvest could lie for months, sometimes years, a stockpile against failure of their crops. As Marquesan society expanded, rivalry developed between neighboring valleys. Each tribe constructed elaborate ceremonial meeting places, paved areas they called tohua, with vast communal pits of fermented breadfruit for times of famine. But in times of war, the gods demanded that the enemy should be defiled by acts of cannibalism and human sacrifice. Pigs were precious. Brought on voyaging canoes by the island's founding ancestors, they became highly esteemed as wealth and given the protection of tribal law. Only chiefs could eat their flesh. To commoners and all women, they were taboo. The word taboo is Polynesian. It is a powerful force imposed on property and places, from a single breadfruit tree to an entire mountain. It means sacred and implies keep off. It threatens retribution to all who disobey. The thief who raids this breadfruit tree risks painful death in the jaws of a shark. The sacred concept of taboo was the Polynesian way of conserving their island's precious resources. The fe'i banana tree only fruits once in its life. It was a delicacy reserved for chiefly people. Marquesan society, like that of Polynesia at large, was a complex web of social obligation and spiritual fear. Spirits communicated with the living through mediums, human images carved in wood or stone. The rustling leaves signaled the presence of a spirit, entreated to enter their sacred tiki. Offerings of fish and fruit presented to the spirit would ensure good fortune. Of all nature's totems, the most potent were red feathers. In the savage beauty of the Marquesan Islands, one aspect of their culture became a distinctive art form with great social importance. The word tattoo is Polynesian. Over many centuries, they perfected the skill of decorating the body with intricate designs. Traditionally, the tools were made from the teeth of dogs or boars, and the pigment from the soot of burnt candle nuts. The tattoo artist, the Taua Patutiki, the expert beater of images, had great prestige. He was paid in pigs and pearl, for it was a sign of manly affluence to afford such skin-deep beauty and to endure such pain. The process was potentially so dangerous that the client was referred to as the victim. Men would respect his bravery. Women would admire his body. It would be worth the pain. For Polynesians, gods and spirits shared the same earthly world as people. Through their tikis, they made contact with their ancestors, to whom they offered sacrifices, often of human life. To the west of Tahiti lies the island of Raiatea. Its name means the faraway heaven. Beneath the shadow of its sacred mountain is an ancient ceremonial site, a place called Tapu Tapuatea, which means most sacred, most feared. At the center of this marae stands the massive investiture stone, the four corners of which were originally supported by the fresh corpses of 4 men, sacrificed to be guardians of this sacred standing stone. It was to Tapu Tapuatea, just before daybreak, that the chiefs and nobility of all the other islands came in their canoes, to be greeted by the high priest and powerful chiefs of Raiatea. Each delegation carried sacrificial offerings of great sharks and turtles, and of chosen men. At sunrise, Raiatea, the faraway heaven, was bathed in blood. Far from the dark heart of Raiatea, above a remote Marquesan shore, tropic birds perform their elegant dance of courtship. At the climax of their aerial display, they fly backwards through the sky. Ever since Polynesian voyagers came to these remote islands, the vision of the tropic bird dancing in the sky was a sign that they had arrived at their new homeland. The pure white bird with a streak of red in its tail embodied the free spirit of their newfound life. It was from these oceanic islands of Tahiti and the Marquesas that other generations of voyagers set out in search of new lands. Hawaii to the north, Easter Island to the east, and New Zealand to the far southwest, the distant corners of the Polynesian Triangle. But from where did these enigmatic people come? Ask any young Marquesan about their origins, and they will point you to the west. From there, long ago, came their voyaging ancestors. Born on the wind like tropic birds, they came from a land far beyond the setting sun.
Next Sunday, a journey westwards across the Pacific unearths dramatic clues to the origins of the people and wildlife of Polynesia on the spectacular islands of Fiji and Samoa.